Good afternoon, class. Today we're going to be looking at 8.6. This will be the last section that we'll cover for Chapter 8, and this involves our solving. Now, the last couple sections we've done in 8.4 and 8.5 have been difficult for some of us. So hopefully, after going through those two sections, reviewing, factoring, common denominators, and all that kinds of stuff, hopefully today's lesson will be a little bit easier for us. Now, first thing, we're going to have two different kinds of solving equations or solving questions. The first one is going to be when there's more than one term. Okay, so you're going to have multiple fractions. Okay, and you can have two fractions on one side, three fractions on one side. I mean, you can see it a lot of different ways. Okay, but the key is there's going to be more than one term, and if you want to put this on here, on each side. Okay, if there's more than one term on each side, this is the method you're going to use. So the first step, the most important step, is you need to factor, just like we've been doing. If you don't factor, you're going to make everything a lot harder. So make sure you factor. Now, it says if necessary, because it's not always going to be necessary. After that, something hopefully we're getting better at seeing and finding. We have to find that LCD, that least common denominator that we talked about in adding and subtracting, and we have to multiply everything by the LCD. And this is going to look a little bit different than what we did with the adding and subtracting. Instead of manipulating one single fraction, we're going to be multiplying, and that's going to get rid of our fractions. Okay, so it's going to look a little bit different than what it did in 8.5. After you do those two steps, then it's going to be easy. Then you're going to simplify and solve. And as it says down here, always check. You're going to have several answers that are going to be extraneous. And remember, extraneous means when you put them back in, they don't work. So make sure you check. Okay, so first step is to factor. There's nothing to factor. We got x's, we got numbers, nothing to factor. Second step is to multiply by the LCD. Well, in order to do that, we need to know what it is. What's our common denominator for what we have in this question? We have an x, we have a 2, and we have another x. So my common denominator is the 2 and the x's. Now, when we were adding and subtracting, we would go through and multiply to manipulate a specific fraction. So I would be multiplying this fraction by 2 on top and 2 on bottom. That would be to manipulate the fraction. What we're going to do today is to actually multiply every fraction by that denominator of 2x. Okay? And it's going to eliminate 2 or 3 steps from what we did the other day. Okay? We could just multiply this one by 2, just multiply the second one by x, just multiply the third one by 2, then we'd combine everything, then we'd have to simplify. Okay, so doing it the way I'm showing you right now is going to eliminate a couple steps for you and make these a lot shorter and a lot easier. Okay, so when you're solving, when you've got an equal sign and you're solving, multiply by that common denominator. Now, if I'm multiplying by that common denominator, I'm multiplying by 2x over 1. So I can look at this and I can say, since I'm multiplying by 2x over 1, I can cancel. What can I cancel right here? I can cancel the x's. Then same thing right here. I'm multiplying by 2x over 1. So what can I cancel? I can cancel the 2's. Same thing here. I'm multiplying by 2x over 1. What can I cancel? The x's. Well, what do you notice just happened on the bottom? Everything is gone. And that will happen as long as you have that denominator. Okay, as long as that is correct. If it's not correct, they won't cancel. Okay, so we cancel everything on the bottom. So what do we have up here now? We have 2 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8. Plus 5 times x equals negative 11 times 2 is negative 22. So by multiplying by that common denominator, it is now gone, leaving you with a simple Algebra 1 question. 8 plus 5x equals negative 22. Well, how do we solve this? We have a 5x over here, so we need to move our 8. How do we move our 8? Subtract. So we get 5x equals negative 30. We have 5x, so we need to divide. So x equals negative 6. Now, last step, and again, do not skip this step. Check. And what does check mean? You plug it back into the original. So I'm plugging it back into what I originally gave you in black. So 4 divided by x, so 4 divided by -6, plus 5 divided by 2 has to equal -11 divided by x, or -11 divided by -6. So this is what we're checking. So the left side has to equal the right side. So what you have right here has to equal -11 over -6. Well, we have wonderful graphing calculators that'll do these fractions for us. So if you haven't started yet, you should be typing this in. 4 over -6 plus 5 over 2, and you want to see what it gives you. Now, you also need to use your common sense. If you have a -11 over a -6, what is that? That's actually a positive. So type this in, see if you get 11 over 6. Remember, use that alpha y equals. Now, those of you who like to do this by hand will have to have a common denominator. So you'd have to change that 5 over 2 into 15 over 6. Okay, and then you'd have to add your tops. But again, you don't need to do this by hand. Type it in your calculator. It does those fractions for you. Okay, hopefully by now you've typed this in. And what does it give you? 11 over 6. And again, do I need these negatives out here? No, because what's a negative over a negative? A positive. So it works, so our answer is -6. The next one, I've got 3 fractions. I've got 1 on the left and I've got 2 on the right. So since I have 3 fractions, more than 1 on each side, I've got to find that common denominator and multiply everything by it. Well, I have x minus 2 right here. This is 7 over 1. 1 can be anything. And the last one is x minus 2. So what's my common denominator? My common denominator is x minus 2. So I need to multiply everything by that so I can cancel them out. So I'm multiplying by x minus 2 over 1. So again, what's on the top, what's on the bottom that we can cancel? That x minus 2. Right here, can we cancel anything? This x minus 2 does not cancel with the bottom. So that one stays. On the third one, though, again, x minus 2 on the bottom, x minus 2 on the top, they are gone. So our denominators have now disappeared. Okay, so now let's figure out what we have left. X minus 2 is gone, so the only thing we have left right here is 5x equals, this is 7 times x minus 2. So what do I get when I do 7 times x minus 2? 7x minus 14. Plus 10, and am I multiplying it by anything? That x minus 2 disappeared, so that's just 10. So I get 5x equals 7x minus 14 plus 10. 7x minus 14 plus 10, the negative 14 plus 10 is -4. Okay, and I kind of did 2 steps in one here. I subtracted the 5x to give me 2x. And then if I have the 2x on the right, I got to move the 4 over. So since this is -4, when I move it over, it's a +4. What's my next step? Divide by 2. So x is 2. Again, don't stop there. Make sure you check it. So we plug it in. 5 times 2 divided by 2 minus 2 has to equal 7 plus 10 divided by 2 minus 2. Okay, well, I can do a couple things in my head before I use my calculator. What's 5 times 2? 5 times 2 is 10. And what is 2 minus 2 on the bottom down here? 2 minus 2 is 0. So we get 10 over 0 equals 7 plus 10 over 0. Okay, we'll go back to Algebra 1. What happens when you have a 0 in the bottom? If you don't remember, type this in your calculator. Do your alpha y equals and type this in. 10 over 0. Or type in 10 divided by 0. Either way, your calculator will give you an error. When you have a 0 on the bottom, that is our undefined. You cannot have those. Okay, so go back to why we're checking. If we're getting a 0 on the bottom, which is giving us an error or an undefined, does this 2 actually work? No. So you need to put a big X through it. You need to put extraneous something, but you need to tell me that 2 does not work. Now, the next one's a little bit harder. This one, we have to do that step 1 that we haven't done yet. We have to factor, okay? And I can't factor anything on the top. I can't factor x minus 2, but I can factor x squared minus 4. So I need to do that first. X squared minus 4, remember there's no middle term. 4 is a perfect. So this splits up into x plus 2 and x minus 2. So what's my common denominator on this one? I need an x minus 2 to satisfy this one. I already have that over here, but I need to add to that an x plus 2. So I need to multiply everything, every fraction that we have by x minus 2, x plus 2. Now on the first one, what's going to cancel? Just the x minus 2's. On the second one, what's going to cancel? Both of them. X minus 2, x minus 2, x plus 2, x plus 2. They're gone. The third one, this is just 1, so it's 1 over 1. So is there anything to cancel? No. So what do we have? We have 3x minus 2, and remember this is a factor, so put parentheses if you need to. 3x minus 2, we need to multiply that by x plus 2, equals 6. Are we multiplying 6 by anything? Nope. Plus 1 times x minus 2 times x plus 2. Okay, so we got a lot of foiling to do on this one. We got some foiling in the front and in the back. Okay, so let's start with our front. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 2 is 6x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. Equals, you got 6, and then we got FOIL again. X times x is x squared. X times 2, 2x. Negative 2 times x, negative 2x. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. Now, hopefully the first thing you recognize when you were foiling over here is we have a positive 2x and a negative 2x. Those are going to disappear. And then over here, I can do a little combining. I got a positive 6x and a negative 2x. That's going to give me 4x. So I have 3x squared, 4x, and negative 4. Over here, I have x squared, and then I can combine the 6 and the negative 4. 6 and negative 4 is plus 2. Now I got to keep going. I got a 3x squared and an x squared. So which one am I going to move? I'm going to move my x squared. Now, I also am going to move my 2 because I have an x squared, an x, and a constant. So when I have an x squared, x, and a constant, I have to factor. So I'm moving everything to one side. So I'm going to subtract that x squared, which means I also need to subtract 2. I need to bring everything over to the same side. So that leaves me with 2x squared plus 4x and minus 6. I have to get that equals 0 here so I can factor this x squared x constant. Now, before you start trying to factor this, always, if there's something in the front, see if you can simplify before you factor. That way it'll make it a little bit easier. I've got a 2, I've got a 4, and I've got a 6. Can I simplify this? 2, 4, and 6. Yes, I can pull out a 2. And when I do so, I'm left with x squared plus 2x minus 3. Now, this is what I'm factoring, much easier. What multiplies to negative 3 and adds to 2? 3 and 1. What kind of a 3 will give you a positive 2? A positive 3 and a negative 1. So 2 times x plus 3 times x minus 1. There's no x out here with this 2, so if I were to put it equal to 0, does that mean anything? 2 equals 0? Nope. So I'm just looking at my x's, x plus 3 and x minus 1. So what are my two answers? Negative 3 and positive 1. Now again, we would have to check. So we plug in negative 3. That's the first one I did. Okay, and again, you can type these in your calculator, especially with that alpha y equals. Type this in. Type the left side in. Get an answer. Type the right side in. Get an answer. And if you're checking, what should you notice? They're either going to be the same or they're going to be different. Okay, be careful when you type them in, especially like around this negative 3. You've got to have parentheses. Okay, but you can simply type them in. Get an answer for the left side, get an answer for the right side, see if they're equal. Okay, so I'm giving you a second. Hopefully you're typing them. Hopefully you've already got one of them. Type the left side, type the right side. Remember, when we're doing this, that x is coming all the way back up here to the original. That's where we're plugging it in. Okay, so what did you get? What did you get for the left side? What did you get for the right side? Hopefully you got an 11 over 5 on the left and an 11 over 5 on the right. Is that true? Do those match? Yes. So -3 is a good. It works. So now we have to do the same thing for 1. Don't just assume. Okay, and my script has fallen off the side a little bit, so you're going to have to plug it in yourself. I've got 3 times x, so it's 3 times 1 minus 2. And then on the bottom, remember you're plugging it in, so this is 1 minus 2. 6 over. So right here, we've got 1 squared minus 4 plus 1. Type those in. And again, we're checking to see if we get the same thing on the left and the same thing on the right. On the left, your calculator should give you a -1. And on the right, your calculator should give you a -1. So they both work. -3 and 1. Now, switching types. How would you solve this question? X over 2 equals 3 over 10. Algebra 1, do you remember? How do you solve? If you have a fraction equals a fraction, you cross multiply. But the key here is you can only cross multiply when you have one fraction on each side. That's the only time. Okay, so that's the second kind of questions we're going to have. When we have one fraction on each side, we can cross multiply. Okay, so these are going to be a little bit easier for you than the last ones. One fraction on each side, cross multiply, and solve. Okay, so I have 2 over x squared minus x equals 1 over x minus x. One fraction, cross multiply, and get done. Okay, make it easy. Don't even worry about factoring right now. Just cross multiply and then go. So I'm going to cross multiply. So I need to do 2 times x minus 1 and 1 times x squared minus x. Now it's an Algebra 1 question. Simplify it and solve. 2x minus 2 equals x squared minus x. Now going back to what we've talked about again, I have an x squared and I have x's, so I'm going to have to bring everything to one side to factor. So my x squared is positive, so I do not want to move it, which means I'm moving everything over to the right because I want to keep this positive. So I need to subtract 2x and I need to add 2 to bring these over. So I have x squared, negative x minus 2x is negative 3x. Add that 2, so plus 2. Now that I've got it equal to 0, now I can factor. What multiplies to 2 and adds to negative 3? 2 and 1, that'll give you 3. But how do I get a negative 3? They both need to be negative. So x minus 2 and x minus 1. Now these are my factors, so what are my answers? Positive 2 and positive 1. Now again, don't short yourself. You gotta check them. So plug in 1. Anywhere you see an x up here, plug in 1. So 2 over 1 squared minus 1, 1 over 1 minus 1. Well, hopefully right off the bat, what do you see down here? What's 1 minus 1? And what is 1 squared minus 1? They're both 0. Can you have a 0 on the bottom? Nope. So does 1 work? No. You need to cross it off. Then plug your 2 in. 2 over 2 squared minus 2, 1 over 2 minus 2. Okay, you can plug this in your calculator, but this is pretty darn easy to do by hand. What's 2 squared? 4. What's 4 minus 2? 2. What's 2 minus 1? 1. Okay, you can do this by hand. So you get 2 divided by 2 and 1 divided by 1. What do both of those equal? 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 divided by 1 is 1. So 1 does not work. 2 does work. Okay, 1 fraction equals 1 fraction. Don't factor. Don't worry about anything. 1 fraction equals 1 fraction. Cross multiply. So 3 times x minus 1, 6 times x plus 2. So what does that give us? 3x minus 3, 6x plus 12. Got a 3x and a 6x, so I'm going to move my 3x. And if I move my 3x to the right, my 12 needs to move to the left. So I'm going to do that at the same time. I'm going to subtract my 12. So that gives me negative 15 equals 3x. Divide both sides by 3. X is negative 5. Last but not least, make sure you check. Plug that back into the original. So 3 over negative 5 plus 2 has to equal 6 over negative 5 minus 1. Well, what is negative 5 plus 2? Negative 3. What's negative 5 minus 1? Negative 6. What is 3 over negative 3? Negative 1. What's 6 over negative 6? Negative 1. Does negative 1 equal negative 1? Yes. So negative 5 works. So I hope today was a little bit easier for you guys since we've been doing the hard stuff with the adding and subtracting the last couple days. So your questions for today are 1 through 17 odd and 19 through 22 all on practice B. Last section for chapter 8. Hopefully you enjoyed this chapter.